Okay, Jerry, give me another one of yours.
Okay, for the next four are going. There is a theme, I promise you. I don't know what it is, but there is a theme. Let's go ahead with Francis Ford Coppola. The next four basically made me want to pick up a camera, if anybody. But Coppola, at first, it's obviously the Godfather movies, all three of them. But obviously, watching those two in high school in the summer with my mom, and then watching the second one with my dad, which was quite an experience, which I don't know if I can recommend it or not. But watching those on video, it was really interesting because video was still, this was 85 or 86, and renting movies was still kind of a novel thing. Not as something that, it was something we did, but it became more and more commonplace, as the years went on, but it's not something I did every week or something. But I remember watching these that summer in high school, and they just blew me away. I was like, wow, this is really about family and what it means to, and why that's important and everything, but it was just, you got so engrossed in the characters. I always heard about these movies growing up. I never watched them. And I had seen Apocalypse Now like a couple of times, like years before that, but Apocalypse Now didn't really become important until the end of high school. And Coppola is one of my favorite interviews that we've done on the whole show. I find him fascinating because he has so many. He's always trying to reinvent himself, whether it's as a winemaker or as a magazine or the hotels or as an independent filmmaker. He's a fascinating man, but he really identifies, I think, very strongly with his characters, especially in Michael. I think he identifies 100% with Michael Corleone. I don't think there's any doubt after watching the third one. But he's a larger-than-life persona, and his movies and the conversation. I know that I think I agree with you, Jamie. That's an incredible movie. There's a couple scenes in that movie I just think about every day. Like I'll see some. Oh yeah, in the conversation, I'll just pinpoint. So you do that with movies. You'll see just like images. I say, oh yeah, that's the conversation I do that with. But I think Apocalypse Now is one of the two greatest adventures ever put on screen. I think it is not the Redux is interesting, but you don't need that. You don't need any of that excess footage. There's a reason that was cut out, and because it's a completely different movie in one sense. When you, but I think Apocalypse Now.
When you add the humor in and stuff like that, and just when you add the humor into it with the whole Colonel with the whole Robert Duvall sequence with stealing the surfboard and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You don't need that. It takes away some of his mystique because he's he's so nuts in that. It's like the precursor to the Great Santini. It's like the prequel to the Great Santini almost.
Well, you could imagine that character being out of wartime. And turning into the Great Santini, and you even feel it in Apocalypse Now, when the most famous scene, the I love the smell of napalm in the morning, and when that monologue ends, Duvall's line is, "One day this war is going to end." Now you're
expecting another line.
you would think that if that line were written in any other movie, it would be kind of a hopeful thing. It's like, my God,
right.
I just have to keep telling myself one day this war is going to end. When he says it, it's wistful because you know he's going to miss it.
He's going to miss it.
What the hell is that character going to do without the war?
The baseball bat is for playing baseball, not hitting your kids with. No. But going back to that and going, Coppola's, it's obviously the making of the film is a fascinating story within itself. But here's a guy who is on the cutting edge. We always talk about Lucas and everything, but it's really, I think Coppola was one of the most cutting edge directors and maybe he still isn't in one sense, but he always seemed to be ahead of the curve, technology-wise there, just as De Palma was too. It's just
he really was ahead of the curve. I mean, and you look at stuff like Rumblefish and that period of time in the early 80s, and One from the Heart, which I think he was the first person to kind of put together a mobile editing unit.
Yeah,
I mean, he
had it there, right?
Yeah, there in his van. Yeah, exactly. When I think of Coppola, I think of he is the great dramatist in the classical sense. And you said that without a doubt he identifies with Michael. I think he identifies just as strongly with the Willard. And in Apocalypse Now, and I think you can see that in that documentary. He is Willard in that movie. He has taken this journey, this journey into an unknown hell, and his challenge is, can I slay this thing and come out on the other side? I mean, just like Willard, can I survive this movie? Do
you remember back when the movie was coming out, and you'd heard so much about it for years, and and just going to see it, and especially, of course, first on your mind was, okay, when I was first sitting down for that movie, I was like, okay, I'm interested in seeing Brando because this is what I've heard about this. But it didn't take more than 10 minutes of that movie to go by, maybe even 5 minutes, with that incredible opening sequence that uses Walter Murch's editing and sound work in that incredible opening sequence that just made you, in 5 minutes, forget that Brando was even in this movie. And then by the time you're reminded, hey, he's in it, he's coming, And then finally, when it gets there, the reviews were so savage about the ending of the film. But now when you go and watch it, you're like, what were they complaining about? And I remember sitting in the theater going, this is just fine. This is more than fine. It's brilliant. It's great.
Yeah.
It's great that Brando showed up and gave Coppola so much trouble and just kept pulling things out.
It worked to his advantage.
Strangenesses out of his head, and was afraid to show his body, and everything. You still watch the movie and you don't see Brando's entire body, but for like one shot. But it's perfect. It creates the perfect sense of mystery and sort of just craziness. I mean, that's what you want in that character. You want absolute, utter craziness,
you've already lived with it for 2 hours. So Brando is the culmination of that craziness.
Yeah, I mean,
that you've already been in the presence of.
I mean, if you want to see all Brando, just watch the opening of Superman. You get to see plenty of them. I mean, that big aluminum foil outfit.
He is the false deity. I mean, he's the guy that's believes his own kind of deluded sense of self. I mean,
I mean, he is
and I don't see how that movie could have ended any other way. Of course, that's how the movie ends. When I ask people, how would you want it to end? Strangely enough, none of them can give me an answer. But somehow they all say it just had a bad ending. No, it ended the way.
It's perfect. It's almost like this, like the Wizard of Oz. You pull the curtain back. When you finally do meet Kurt, it is just this like you said, deluded man, American power unchecked, spoiled, rotten, in love with it. What G.D. Sparling says at the beginning. Operating without any control.
That's exactly the journey that Martin Sheen could find himself on. He is at that precipice when after he slays Marlon Brando and he walks out and all the tribesmen are looking up at him. He could be Brando. He could assume that role, and he chooses not to. He walks away. That's the perfect ending.
one of the things I want to say about Coppola is, okay, there's Apocalypse Now, but with all of his movies, there's a certain different sort of flavor of storytelling going on in just about every one of his greatest movies. I mean, he's had some movies that didn't work, no question about it. But
right.
If you go back into things like, You're a Big Boy Now, with that sort of 60s mentality that's going on in it, this sort of very youthful kind of sort of devil may care kind of thing that's going on in that. And then in something like The Rain People, that was done with Shirley Knight in the lead, which was an early sort of call for, women's rights, or at least a female freedom, or at least a sense of breaking away from, the traditional female roles. And then you go into The Godfather, which the Godfather series, just in general, is just incredible, epic storytelling that's just so involving that you just feel like you're just falling into a hole while you're watching those movies, And then you take a look at something like The Conversation, which is really a movie about loneliness. Really, it's really a movie about loneliness and solitude in a lot of ways. And then you go to something like, to jump further in his career, to something like Tucker, The Man in His Dream.
That's a good movie. I like that movie a lot.
Which is ridiculously fun, even though it should be a dark movie about how somebody was, an entrepreneur was crushed by the bigger companies and so forth and so on. It doesn't have any of that feel to it. It has the feel of, hey, look, I accomplished something. I accomplished what I set out to do. That character accomplished what he set out to do, and he did it with joy and aplomb, at least according to the movie. And you really get that, You really come out of that. I think Tucker was one of his greatest movies, It's
a great movie. It's a very good movie.
It is. I mean, it's something that everybody should go back and look at just as much as they go back and look at the more famous titles of his career. But
you mentioned something about him being not all of the movies being great, and I think that's pretty much indicative of a lot of the directors that we're probably going to be discussing, because these directors, the best directors, risk big. And you with that kind of approach, you can win big or you could fall big. But at least you're reaching and you're risking, and I think that's the true test of a great artist. I mean, not all of Dracula works, but
when it does, it is
incredibly experimental and risky and out there. And then he could go and he could do a more classically structured piece like The Rainmaker, something that just exists for the joy of storytelling and the joy of being in the company of enjoyable actors. And that's the best Grisham movie there is.
Oh, I agree 100% with you.
That's absolutely true. And then look at like his early '80s stuff with things like One from the Heart. I mean, a ridiculously different kind of movie. And maybe his only movie that has music as a really, really central component. I mean, to the point where people are singing on the screen. And then going into things like The Outsiders and Rumblefish, which were so concerned with youthful sort of rebellion, and but not making it so that it was, they're obviously influenced by things like Rebel Without a Cause and so forth, but they have a certain visual. They have both of those movies, especially the Coppola, the director's cut of Outsiders, by the way, is great. I mean, that's one of the great director's cuts that's out there, because he really totally reinvented the movie, with music, and he kind of jettisoned a lot of the score that his own father did for the movie, and replace it with, period songs, and it actually makes the movie pop a lot more. But those two movies are just incredible visual treats, just beautiful, and beautiful also ensemble cast in many of his movies. I mean, all of his movies are just ridiculous ensemble casts that just blow you away.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, another exciting choice. See, that sparked a great, passionate conversation. So good choice. Dean, what's your next one?
My next one is a filmmaker that only had an output of 5. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 movies. He only worked from 1969 to 1983, and his name is Bob Fosse.
Oh,
for me,
I've been thinking a lot about Bob Fosse lately, actually.
Bob Fosse to me is just such an amazing, amazing filmmaker. First of all, let's get out of the way the fact that since the 50s, he had been an actor in movies, in such movies as Kiss Me Kate and Damn Yankees. He had been a dancer in those same movies and even a singer in those movies as well. But he was also mainly known for being a stage director. He had, by the end of his career, he had won a record 6 Tonys for choreography on the stage. And he had won. He's also one of the few filmmakers, maybe the only filmmaker, that has won an Emmy, an Oscar, and a Tony in the same year, which was 1972.
Wow.
So that's pretty amazing, too. Okay, so he was an actor. He was a dancer. He was a choreographer. He was a writer. He was a director. He had all of these amazing abilities. And, that alone, puts him, in my heart. It's like just being, well, this is just a one-of-a-kind person. This is just a one-of-a-kind. You're never going to see the likes of Bob Fosse ever again. But, in addition, when you look at even something that he didn't direct, like, let's take, for instance, Chicago, which was something that he had directed on stage. Or you look at something like, years ago, it's probably hard to find now, but there used to be a very popular tape on the video store shelves that was a videotaped version of his production of Pippin, which starred Ben Vereen in the production that was videotaped. At least it starred Ben Vereen and William Catt in the lead role.
William Catt, wow, okay.
Yeah. When you look at, or you look at something like Dancing, which was something that he had, which was sort of like a compilation of all of his choreographed work for the stage, that was done as a stage play in the mid-'70s. Then later on, of course, there was the stage play Fosse. When you look at any of Fosse's dancing, let's just forget about the film work. When you look at any of Fosse's dancing, stuff that he created for the dancers that he loved and worked with, it's absolutely unmistakable that is his work. I defy you to name another choreographer that you just see their work and you just absolutely know that's them. Okay, that aside, stage work aside, when you look at the film work of Bob Fosse, the quality of the photography, the sort of weird, sort of sideways staginess of the photography, the crispness of the editing, the sort of strange mixture of love and revulsion for the entire show business industry that he has. The sort of the rapport that he seems to have with actors, the sort of uncompromising and even often vulgar writing that he does. I mean, all of these things mixed together, and it's just like you're just never going to see another person that has this ever again. You know, you're just not going to see it.
Yeah, and you said that the kind of the balance between the empathy and the revulsion of his characters, and I mean, I sensed that in a lot of what he did. I mean, and you, of course, all that jazz is very autobiographical, and it's very honest about who Fosse is and what his faults were. And then you look at Star 80 and you look at Eric Roberts' portrayal of Paul Snider in Star 80,
right.
And you could tell this is someone that Fosse empathizes with, even though obviously his behavior is repellent. And it doesn't shy away from that. I mean, when I think of Fosse, that's the characteristic I most think of. He doesn't shy away from from his subjects, foibles and all. You know, he did Sweet Charity. That was his debut film in '69, and that was not a success. And so it wasn't a sure thing to bring him on to direct Cabaret. But it's interesting how, Jerry, you just chose Francis Ford Coppola, and Bob Fosse's actually beat Francis Ford Coppola for the Best Director Oscar the year The Godfather came out for Cabaret. So these two are connected in that peripheral way.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I love Cabaret. I love All That Jazz. I think All That Jazz is an extraordinarily raw movie, and Star 80 is incredibly powerful. I'm not so crazy about Lenny.
Yeah, really. I mean, I feel Lenny is a very, very well. First of all, one of the things I love about Lenny, which is something that he sort of repeated in Star 80, is sort of the quasi-documentary sort of framing that both of those movies have.
Right.
They're, you know, a lot of the characters are sort of narrating the movie as if they're talking in a documentary to an unseen filmmaker. And I really love Lenny for reproducing the time period, first of all, but also for its ability to dramatize a person that was hard to understand, I think. He was a difficult person to really get a hold of because of his drug addiction, but also because of how beset he was by the courts. You know, after a while, Lenny Bruce in the movie and in real life actually lost his identity because he was no longer a comedian. He was now a person who was fighting for a cause, and even a cause that he didn't truly understand. I think that might be. I think Lenny might be. You know, I like Sweet Charity just for entertainment value and everything like that. I mean, it's a good, entertaining, not a great movie. But and so I really concentrate my love for his work on his last four movies, and particularly on All That Jazz, which I consider to be like absolutely one of the greatest movies that's ever been made. I mean, I can just remember going to see All That Jazz. I saw it maybe 3 times in the first week that I had first been exposed to it, I was like, this is unbelievable. I've got to go see it again. I could not make myself sit in a chair long enough for me to go, I've got to go see it. It's right down the street. I have to go see it again. It's like, it's too incredible. Just in all of his movies too, of course, the mixture of music and just that, and the editing. I mean, the editing in his movies is just ridiculous. I just can't get over it. I can't even put words to it.
Very much.
It's just beyond me.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I do think that all that jazz is his masterpiece.
That's a good one.
Why isn't that on Blu-ray? I mean, that's not on Blu-ray yet.
Yeah, that's a crime. But I mean, you know, if there's anything out there that's, I mean, I always suspect that there's certain element to Bob Fosse movies that's keeping people from watching them because they just don't think it's their kind of movie. You know, like I remember being at a video store. You know, I used to work at a video store, and people would come in, and I knew what their tastes were like. You know, they like Taxi Driver and so forth. I said, you need to watch this, All That Jazz. Well, it has people on the cover, women on the cover of it that are dressed in dancer tights and stuff like that with their hats on and everything. And they're like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I want to watch that. You know what? Forget all that stuff. Just watch the movie. Believe me, when you come out of that movie, if you just don't have any kind of appreciation for it, then I just don't know what to say. I'm without any kind of words to say.
Right. It's interesting to me how with All That Jazz, I mean, obviously he was looking for an actor to play his surrogate and the lead, and that Richard Dreyfuss was brought on, and he worked with him for a couple of weeks, and then he dropped out. He just wasn't right for it. And then Roy Scheider, who had no background in the musical, I don't think. I mean, he was really out of his element. And honestly, Roy Scheider's performance in that is incredible. That's
true.
Amazing.
It is ridiculously like. First of all, has any director ever made a movie as autobiographical to the point where they predict their own deaths? I mean,
it's embarrassing honest and confessional.
Yeah.
You want to look away at times. Yeah.
Right.
It is. It's ridiculous. And then, but has on top of that, has any other actor ever sort of usurped their director's personality more than Roy Scheider did with Bob Fosse? I don't think there is. I can't think of one.
Yeah.
It's just not out there, you know.
Well, we're going to do a series on Bob Fosse. I've wanted to forever. It's just a question of who I can get to talk to. But I have been thinking about him a lot in the past week or so. I don't know what inspired it, but I got the notion again that we need to explore him because he's a filmmaker that I definitely want to delve into more.
Yeah, he's just great. I mean, and it's so fun to know too. Just my final thing, it's fun to know that he had such a small output, but not one of those movies is something you should just toss off and just say, yeah, I don't need to watch that.
Yeah.
It's a rare filmmaker that you can say everything they did was good. So
right.
He had the directorial career equivalent of John Cazale.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You're right.
Let me do my second choice, and then we'll decide what other night we want to get together to finish our list. So we can make this a two-part show because we can't. We'll be going on for 4.5 hours if we continue this pace.
Okay.
But I want to pay service, equal time to each choice. I don't want to shortchange any choice.
I just saw a Shooting Star.
Wow.
I just saw a Shooting Star. I haven't seen one. Not like that.
If only I had the Kool in the Gang song. Is that who sang Shooting Star? Your Shooting Star?
No, but it's just amazing. I've never seen one that close.
Earth, Wind and Fire.
I've never seen one that close. That was wow. Okay.
It's a magical night, Jerry.
It's a magical night. Yeah. Okay. Bob Fosse and the Shooting Star.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If I started a band, that's exactly what I'd call it.
That's a great band name.
Yeah,
Bob
it's
Fosse
like
and the Shooting Star.
My version of Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet. That's yeah. Okay, my second choice is one of the most distinctive filmmakers of the past 30 years, and or longer, actually, going on 35 years, I think. And I'm talking about David Lynch. What is unique about David Lynch is that truly, I mean, he's made, I don't know how many films, I'd have to go back and count, but I count 3 of his films among my personal favorites. Mm-hmm. There are the others are kind of a mixed bag for me, but I'm so passionate about these 3 movies that I just devour them. They're a part of me, and those 3 movies are Blue Velvet, Wild at Heart, and Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. And I always equate him with being a stream of consciousness filmmaker, because he always talks about ideas and how magical it is when an idea happens upon you and you build upon it with another morsel and another idea and blah blah blah, and it forms into this living thing. I like his approach to the creative process that way. And I was reading, I have a revised first draft of his Wild at Heart script. He wrote Wild at Heart, I think, in like 2 weeks. It was the fastest he ever finished a screenplay, he said. And at least the first draft that I have, it's very sloppy in places. But you know the scene in the New Orleans restaurant, there's Sailor and Lula are sitting at the bar, and there's a man sitting beside them that just looks at them, and he says in this strange, strained voice, he says, "Pigeons spread diseases and mess up the place. You see that?" and that's all that character says in the movie. Well, David Lynch wrote like a 4-page monologue for this guy. And he talked about his background and how much he hates pigeons and how he used to kill pigeons in his neighborhood. He used to stand up on the rooftop with a rifle and shoot them. And some passerby saw him and called the cops on him. They thought he was some kind of assassin or marksman or something, and he was a danger. This is like a 76-year-old man. He goes through this whole story, and then Sailor's like, "Why don't you like pigeons?" And then one of his lines of dialogue in his response is that line: pigeons spread diseases and mess up the place. You see that? And all David Lynch did, I mean, was he took that one line, and that's that gentleman's performance in that movie.
Right. Okay. Wow.
It's a very strange, unique, memorable, like unforgettable moment, just because it comes out of nowhere. But I think that in his creative process, he had to write those 4 pages of dialogue in
order to just get that one line,
to get that one moment, to kind of work it out in his mind. And I'm wondering, what did he shoot those 4 pages? And he just said, let's just simplify this. Let's make this really memorable. Let's just have him say that one thing and then walk away. And that makes the scene really pop. What's very special about Wild at Heart to me is the fact that Sailor and Lula are the most iconic romantic couple in modern movies for me. They're innocent, they're highly sexual, they're rebellious, their love exists in the midst of great danger and oppression, but it shines through. It's the kind of love that we feel when we fall in love for the first time, and we think that we're invincible, and nothing could ever destroy it. And then you grow up, and life happens, and you get jaded, and it kind of, you drift apart, but when I think about that kind of evolution or de-evolution of a relationship, I always think back on Sailor and Lula. I say, but there's always the hope that you could have a Sailor and Lula kind of love, that you could hold on to that, and that's something that's the thing that I respond to most in David Lynch. It's the contrast, and it's never more apparent for me than it is in Wild at Heart. Between obviously the light and the dark, but between love and death, between life and decay, it's so visceral the way he expresses the extreme contrasts in life.
I always admired your take on Wild at Heart, because I know that movie means a lot to you, and it's a very good movie. But we talk about Lynch. I've never asked you though, what do you think of The Straight Story?
I like The Straight Story. I think it has the perfect. I think it has the perfect title, because that's the straightest story as he's ever told.
Right. Yeah.
And I like it. There is, as in all of his movies, a definite sense of environment and place and tone, and at the same time, it's slightly off kilter. I mean, it's his version of a family-friendly movie.
Right.
But it's actually, I mean, it's a man that goes on a quest on a tractor, and he encounters different people and different kinds of adventures in a certain way, weirdness here and there. So it's not, in its form, it's not totally unlike a Wild at Heart necessarily, which is also a road movie of a kind. I like it very much, but it kind of mutes what makes him so distinctive for me.
Well, see, I would venture to disagree there. I think The Straight Story is as Lynchian a movie as all of the rest of them are, but it's in a very secretive sort of. Well, it's in a very secretive way. I mean, what we're dealing with in Straight Story is an elderly man with a past that we don't know specifically what it is. Okay.
Right.
He's got a past. Look, he says early on in the movie that he has a lot of children, but there's only one child that's left behind to take care of him, and it's presumably, the most infirm child that they had, that he and his wife had. His wife has passed away, and who's left behind? Sissy Spacek. Sissy Spacek plays a daughter that has a speech impediment, and perhaps could be considered a little slow. But it takes a little while for you to figure out that he actually has a lot more children that are not in his life. Well, what's the reason for that? Okay, secondly, he also lets you know, we also know that he's had a falling out. This is the whole reason for his going across country. His whole reason for going across country is that he's had a falling out with his brother. We don't know what the falling out is, but we know that it was big enough to destroy their relationship. And now he's gotten word that his brother is dying, and he feels that he has to go and repair that relationship, even at this late date. Okay, even if it takes him to take a riding lawnmower across country to do it, he's going to do it. As the movie progresses, and he meets a lot of the people that he meets along the way, we find out little bitty pieces of the sort of, perhaps the unpleasant person that he was in the past. Now he's an older man, and he's got perspective on things. But that's not the man that he was. What I'm saying here is that The Straight Story is a movie about a guy that has a dark past.
Right.
But we don't know that past, and the director's interesting choice is that he chooses not to dramatize that past at all, except through what the man is experiencing in the present. There's no flashbacks.
Right.
There's none of that stuff. That's the brilliance of that movie.
Well,
that movie is deceptively sweet.
I think so too. But for people that don't like Lynch, that don't respond to his particular brand of ambiguous weirdness, Straight Story is the movie for him. And I do think among his catalog, it is his straightest story, because all the questions. All the unanswered questions you just mentioned, you don't need to know the answers to those. In a lot of Lynch's movies, but particularly I find in Fire Walk with Me, great sections of Fire Walk with Me, it's not that they're unanswered questions. You don't even know the question. I mean, you're like, what the hell is going on? That whole David Bowie segment. It's like, what the? But with Fire Walk with Me,
even if you're a fan of the show, watching that movie, Twin Peaks, watching that movie, you're like, okay, now what's going on here?
and the movie is a different experience from the show, and I do think that the movie is Lynch's full-out horror film, and I do feel like, again, there is such a tremendous love and compassion for Laura Palmer in the movie, and such a heartfelt pain for what she's going through, and yet Lynch does not look away. I mean, he faces the horror of it, and somehow when Laura reaches her end, she finally reaches her salvation. She's finally free of this albatross. So there's that, and there's the amazing performance of Cheryl Lee in the film. And there's also there's these deleted scenes. Apparently there's like 40-some-odd minutes of deleted footage. It was written in the script, and much of it was shot. And there's this big campaign, find the deleted footage from Fire Walk with Me and either reinstate it in the movie or put it on the Blu-ray when that comes out. And Lynch and Robert Ingalls, the screenwriter, they've said that this footage exists somewhere. We're close to finding it. I mean, this has been going on for years. It got tied up in the studio went under or something. They didn't know what happened to the footage, and then they tracked it down. I don't want them to put the footage back, because apparently most of the footage, it has stuff that goes to like a different country. It's got more comical stuff. Lynch even said that if that footage would have ended up in the movie, it would have been a much lighter movie than what you have now. I like Fire Walk with Me because it's a completely dark experience, as it should be. It's about the trauma of a girl who's being raped by her father, and that downward spiral into hell.
And let's just face it, it's the culmination. It's the culmination of a show that captured that captured the world's imagination for 2 or 3 years. And it still remains, Twin Peaks still remains possibly the most influential show of the past 30 years, I would say.
Yes. Oh, no, definitely.
I feel like without Twin Peaks, I definitely feel like you wouldn't have The Sopranos, and
you wouldn't have The Sopranos. You wouldn't have The X-Files. I don't think you would have Mad Men either. No, I mean, Twin Peaks really revitalized, did something to TV. David Lynch did something to TV. But it's interesting you bring up Lynch, because I think we had talked about this. I would love Lynch to make one, or just another movie. On a real movie, not something that's just almost verges on like painful self-parody like Inland Empire. Something really substantial. I can't go back and watch Inland Empire. It was hard enough to watch the first time, I think. I mean, I really do, but I just wish you'd go back and make another movie.
I have a tremendous love for Inland Empire, too. I mean, I'm going to be quite honest here. Jamie, you picked Altman, and I said that he would be one of my top 5 filmmakers if I was just going to go and say my top 5 filmmakers of all time. Altman would be in the top 5, and Lynch would be in the top 5 too. I mean, to me, what's so amazing about Lynch is that, and I'm going to keep this short, but what's the most amazing to me about Lynch is his realization that watching movies is only a hair's breadth away from going to sleep and dreaming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. True.
His movies are about dreams, I think. And I mean, I think this speaks to, you know, one of the reasons that David Lynch has sort of dropped out of the filmmaking thing, you know, it seems like he's absent from filmmaking these days. Although he has done stuff online. He did a huge documentary thing that's online that was going around interviewing just normal people across the nation.
Yeah, I love that series.
And so he's still in there making films, but I think he's forward thinking. You know, I think that he's trying to incorporate, you know, the newer modes of filmmaking into his mind. But also, let's don't forget that one of his big causes these days is transcendental meditation.
Right.
And he's trying to get schools to teach transcendental meditation to their students. And I think that's something that's captured his imagination a little bit more. Now, why has that captured his imagination? Because he realizes that in the process of transcendental meditation, which is something like lucid dreaming, and it can be seen as something like lucid dreaming, he feels that people can get a greater clarity about their own lives. Well, this is exactly what he feels about filmmaking. He feels that filmmaking is sort of like the watching of movies is sort of like a lucid dream, and the watching of movies actually creates a state in people's minds in which they are open to revelations about their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of possibly the most amazing thing about him. I don't think that there's another filmmaker out there that you can say that they trade in this. I mean, they might touch on it sometimes, but do they trade in it? No. This is what David Lynch does.
Right.
He creates living dreams in front of us. And let me just go back early in his career, his first movie, which remains my favorite movie of his, and it was also Stanley Kubrick's. You know, Stanley Kubrick loved this movie. And even David Lynch in a recent book says, you know, I found out that he loved Eraserhead and wanted to screen it again and again. And that's one of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten, was that Kubrick loved Eraserhead. Well, I find Eraserhead to be his true masterpiece. The work that went into Eraserhead is absolutely astounding. That guy worked on that movie from 1972 to 1977.
Mm-hmm.
He actually delivered. David Lynch actually had no budget for this movie. He was lucky to get some kind of hovel in the back of the AFI Film Institute to go and film scenes from this movie. And he did it over 5 years with a very dedicated crew of actors and technicians. He went through 2 cinematographers, one of which died during the process of the movie. He hand-painted every single tile that you see in the movie on the floors. He designed every single piece of, and this is not something that he did for just this movie. He did it all the way up to the present. He designed every piece of furniture. Every single thing that you see in the frame of a David Lynch movie is something that he put there. he insisted on it. Every single thing that's in the frame.
Yeah, there's a story that Laura Dern told about Wild at Heart, and they were in the hotel set, and Lynch said, "I think that nightstand needs a lamp. Let me make one real quick." And he went off and he made a lamp. And like an hour later, he comes back and just puts it down and says, "Okay, we're ready to go."
That's ridiculous. Name another director that does that. No, there isn't one. But let me just talk about Eraserhead for a second. Eraserhead is just one of the most amazing, sort of otherworldly movies that's ever been made. Every single bit of it, every frame, every sound that appears through Alan Splett's amazing sound design is just extraordinary. And the fact that it was filmed over 5 years with David Lynch having to deliver newspapers in order to finance the movie, and he had a child on the way, and the movie's about his fears of being a father and everything. So the movie is, even in some sense, just as autobiographical as all that jazz was, for Fosse. What's interesting, I think the connective tissue in all of these film directors that we're talking about right now is that their lives are almost indistinguishable from their movies. There is no point in in each one of these filmmakers that we've talked about, Tarantino all the way up to Lynch, their lives are almost indistinguishable from the movies that they produce. There's no separation there. They put their complete selves into these movies.
Yeah,
right.
I mean the great directors commit.
All great artists commit. Yeah, but the thing I wanted to bring, we were talking about Lynch making another movie. I think we've talked about this on the show. Is also Coppola. I wish Coppola would make another big movie. One more big movie, maybe based on a bestseller or something. If he made one of the Jonathan Franzen novels on freedom or The Corrections. I mean, even though The Corrections was going to be an HBO series, but if he made something like that, a meaty, big American recent novel into. I mean, it's something that Coppola excels at. I think he's in his conversation phase. I mean, I think that those are the kinds of movies he always envisioned himself building a career making. Right. These little smaller and more intimate character portraits. But with Lynch, and I'll say one last thing about the contrasts of Lynch, and I do think that's the distinguishing factor for me in all of his work, is that the contrast, and this echoes what you just said, Dean. The contrast exists in the man. I mean, with David Lynch, you have a dirty Boy Scout, and you have the guy that says okie dokie, and the solid gold after it gives a good take. You have the guy that cracks up behind the camera during the Dennis Hopper rape scene in Blue Velvet because he's just giddy about how over the top it is. He finds it funny. Yeah, so I mean, you have this extremely polished, polite, all-American exterior with this really naughty person underneath. And I love that. I mean, it's delectable. It makes for great cinema.
It is. I mean, it's funny, when we're talking about our favorite filmmakers, when I was making my list, I had difficulty sort of separating the films from the people that made them.
Right.
I have one exclusion here in my 5 that I'm going to talk about, but because one of the people that I'm going to talk about, I don't really know much about their lives, but his life. But for the most part, these filmmakers are just absolutely I mean, they're such personalities unto themselves it's difficult for me to actually discern whether what I love about them is just their films. It's obviously their films. I love those things about them. But it's also, I love them. I love those people. I like these people. You know, I like them as people. I would love to sit around with them.
Exactly.
You know, I would, you know, that's the thing, you know. And even with the one person that's on my list that I'm going to talk about, who's, you know, who I don't know about, I would love to know exactly what it is, you know, that makes his films great and everything. I suspect that he's very much like his films. So.
Yeah. Okay, we'll come back in a day or so with part 2 of our list of our favorite directors. We want to give plenty of breathing room to discuss each and every one of them in detail, and that's far too much content to contain in a single show. So, but we will come back with part 2.